You think it was a key variable?
Yes, I think Israel has a lot of influence on this country, and they obviously do. I mean, like, I don't even know how this is debatable. The hundreds of millions of dollars that he got from Miriam Adelson, you know, I'm sure that has some influence on him. To a hardcore Zionist, saying America should just stay out and be neutral is basically saying we should be Adolf Hitler. I mean, they were just like furious about it.
Dave Smith just exposed a pro-Israel Zionist, Coleman Hughes in this case, for denying Israel's influence over the U.S. political system. And in this clip, they delve into Israel's influence over Trump, which Coleman Hughes denies, hilariously so, I think, and how this affects U.S. foreign policy in general. So let's get right into it. This one's a fiery conversation, great debate. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel.
I think that a lot of I don't know that I would call a lot of the neocons, I don't know if they were acting in bad faith exactly. I mean, many of them did act in bad faith at moments. But I think many of them believed in their worldview. Okay. And believed that this was gonna, you know, like, be better for the world. That I do think that they, like, I think for the most part, they thought what they were doing was ensuring of the next century for American dominance.
What is your theory of Donald Trump? Because measured by his actions, he may go down as the most pro-Israel president in history. We're talking about moving the embassy to Jerusalem. We're talking about recognizing Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights, which I find it an interesting fact to contemplate that the Israel lobby, as powerful as you think it is, couldn't get any president to do that for 36 years, even though it just takes a single stroke of a pen. But they could get us into a whole war.
Yeah, but that's, again, not exactly what I'm saying, but all right.
Well, it's implied. It's implied. I mean, if they could get us into a whole war, why couldn't they get a single president for 36 years to recognize the Golan Heights? It's a much lower lift for us.
It's a set of priorities and a hierarchy of priorities. It's much, you know, more beneficial from the pro-Zionist hardcore Likudnik perspective to draw the U.S. into a war than it is to acknowledge that territory, which they hold and have occupied since 1967 anyways. And, you know, to Dave's point, maybe there were some of the the vile neocons in the Bush administration in particular, that really did believe, you know, that this unipolar moment at the end of the Cold War when the Soviet Union fell opened up new doors for the United States to assert military dominance and empire building across the country. Maybe some of them honestly believed it in all of their zeal, but we know that that's been catastrophic regardless, and I know Dave argues that too. But to Coleman's point, this is a rather minor thing, if you ask me, in the set of, you know, needs that Zionists would want. Trump signed the Abraham Accords, moved the U.S. Embassy, like he said. He shredded the JCPOA, or at least the U.S. connection to it. He pardoned the handler of Jonathan Pollard, all in his first term.
Right? Condoleezza Rice talks about, in her memoir, she talks about a story where, remember, President Bush gave this Palestine speech in 2002, and he said, we're going to push for a two-state solution, and we're going to call the Arab state, we're going to call it Palestine. So she tells a story that the Israelis were freaking out, and they called Condoleezza Rice and they said, you absolutely cannot call it Palestine because it's called Judea and Samaria. That's that's historically. And Condoleezza Rice said, basically, screw you. We're not rewriting our speech for you at all. And they said, hold on, let me talk to Sharon. Call Sharon. Okay, can you just add the word new? Just add one word to the speech. Call it New Palestine instead of Palestine. And Condoleezza Rice says, absolutely not. It's written. Basically, fuck off. And don't try to lobby Congress either, because it's not going to work.
A very minor point that had no consequence in terms of policy. These are singular words in a speech that didn't have any ramifications, unlike the war against Syria, against Assad, unlike the war against Libya, unlike the Iraqi occupation that lasted 20 years and bankrolling the genocide in Gaza. None of those things were hung in the balance. These are words in a script. So I don't see how this is consequential in any regard. Let's see what Dave has to say.
So the idea is like the same Israelis that can't get President Bush to add one little teeny word to a speech could somehow get us into a 10-year war, billions of dollars.
I think this is like Coleman, the logic of this is like if you had one like anecdote about like I asked my wife for a sip of coffee and she wouldn't share it with me. And then you were like, so we're supposed to believe that you couldn't get this woman to share a sip of coffee with you, but you could get her to marry you and have kids with you and do all of that? Like, yeah, okay. I've
That's
never...
actually
I've
good enough. Whose wife
I've
wouldn't
never
share a
been
sip
like-
of coffee with them?
Huh?
Whose wife wouldn't share a sip of coffee with them?
I don't
That's
know. I was
actually
just
a good
thinking about
analogy.
if there was maybe if there's one little thing that your wife wouldn't do for you or something like that. Yeah, you're right. She'd probably share a sip of coffee. I don't know. I'm just saying, like, it doesn't prove the point. It doesn't follow from that. I've never been one of these conspiracy kooks. I'm not claiming Israel controls everything that ever happens.
Well, you think it was a key variable, though. You think it was a key variable.
Yes, I think Israel has a lot of influence on this country, and they obviously do. I mean, like, I don't even know how this is debatable. And anyway, that being said, like, yeah, you're right. What all of the sum total of what Israel has gotten out of the United States of America is like undying loyal support, hundreds of billions of dollars, backing them in war, protecting them, bribing off their neighbors to help them. But yeah, they didn't get every single little thing that they ever wanted. So
Yeah, this is absolutely right, and it's just crazy. If Israel doesn't wield influence over the United States, which Coleman Hughes is denying that it's palpable, why not make them register under FARA? Would that be, a stretch too far? Would that be a bridge too far, Coleman, if that was true? Or if your position is that it shouldn't register under FARA, why? It's just so ridiculous. Can we withdraw the $20 million that we have given them last year and now $12 billion more this year? Can we do that? No, he's going to say no. It's just absurd to deny this. AIPAC brags about the influence they have over our government. Netanyahu has bragged about the influence he has over our government in that leaked video from, I believe, either 2000 or 2001, where he said the Americans are easily moved. And this isn't a conspiracy. You can look up that video, caught on film, when he said, turn off the camera. And for whatever reason, it didn't get turned off. Like, they say this openly. This is not something that should be even contested.
I certainly agree with that. I think just recently, I think that Netanyahu didn't get everything he wanted out of Trump in Iran just now. Even like you said, Donald Trump, who knows if this is true, but he went on record and said that he would not stand for Israel annexing the West Bank, or Judea and Samaria, as you like to call it.
I wasn't calling it that.
The Israelis like to call it.
I don't call it. I don't care what it's called. I don't care about the religious.
Me neither, to be honest.
Stuff.
But yeah, so anyway, back to your question of my gauge of Donald Trump, my gauge of Donald Trump in general is always just, I think one of the things that's interesting about Donald Trump is that like left-wingers and right-wingers always project this thing onto him that I don't think exists. Like, like the left-wingers are like, he's literally Hitler for years, and then the right-wingers see him as like this champion of patriotic Americans, and I've always just seen him as Donald Trump, like just what he is. Like, I don't know. I think he's a guy who's never read a book about anything.
Yeah, he's not intellectually curious whatsoever, and he surrounds himself with a host of characters, a lot of which are neocon leaning, and he's not Hitler, and he's not some champion of American liberty or something like that. That both kind of polls purport. That is true. And the key thing I want to add here is that I'm generally with Dave on this. I don't think Israel has total control of the U.S. government. There are people complicit with what Israel wants in the U.S. government. But when the prospect of regime change was on the table with Iran, Trump took the off-ramp that Iran gave him, admittedly so, to kind of get off that thing. They tipped him off to a missile strike that wasn't going to touch any U.S. troop, when Netanyahu has clearly wanted regime change there forever. Now, was it on the table? Yes, and if Iran acted differently, I think he could have justified it with a propaganda program, which he was unfurling in the days prior to that. But yeah, there are some things that show, it's not just full control. Is it considerable control? Yes. Is there any other country that has even remotely the same control and influence over our government? No. And for all the propaganda that said how close Trump was to Putin and Russia had complete control over the government. That is a farcical thing in comparison to saying what influence Israel tangibly does have over our government.
Like, I think everything he knows comes from a show that he saw. Like, that's essentially where Donald Trump's at. He'll watch Hannity and then form an opinion on a complicated topic, or watch Morning Joe.
Yeah, I agree with this. My question, though, about Trump is what accounts for his pro-Israeli, maybe not perfectly consistently, but compared to other U.S. presidents. Well, I mentioned all those examples, bombing Iran. What accounts for this? Is it that do you think he's influenced by Israel, or do you think he's coming to these decisions on his own base because he thinks they're good decisions as an American president?
That's an interesting question, and we're kind of into the territory of speculating. I mean, like, I'm sure he's influenced to some degree. Like, yes, I'm sure that like the hundreds of millions of dollars that he got from Miriam Adelson, I'm sure that has some influence on him. Like, I would say that about any politician with a donation that size.
But he doesn't have another election to worry about.
Yeah, but he does have a midterm, and that's a pretty big deal. Whether she could fund a whole bunch of, you know what I mean,
And it's not just the midterm, it's that his entire agenda would be compromised if he lost the faith of his voter base, which he is losing over the Epstein scandal cover-up, the handling of this genocide in Israel, over not stopping the Ukraine war and actually rattling sabers with Russia to a greater extent by saying that, we're going to fund Ukraine to take back all the lost Ukrainian territory and spending like crazy, like nuts. He does have that agenda that would be jeopardized if he doesn't follow through with some of his promises. And, he is significantly influenced by Israel, just as he was significantly influenced by other donors that gave him a lot of money. I think Elon Musk in this election gave him more money than Miriam Adelson, and let's be consistent and say he was influenced by Elon Musk too. Musk got his quasi-governmental entity, Doge, started up. Didn't really save any money despite the $2 trillion in projections that they tried to fly out there. And he got disgruntled. It caused a schism at one point, and Elon left. But at the same point, he influenced him too. But why is it passé to talk about this in relation to Miriam Adelson or the Israel lobby? That is, a correct and tangible influence too.
And also just on the human level, when someone's done that much for you, I do tend to feel like you owe them one. But
not Donald Trump. I think Donald Trump.
You or me,
maybe.
You might be right about that. But I know that he does have a midterm election, and that's a big deal to him and his legacy, whether or not these Republicans maintain the Congress. So, but I will say, I do remember, and I'm really not speculating here or making any more of this than it is. And this is a little bit vague in my mind. You might remember this better than me. But there was when Donald Trump was running in 2016, he at one point pissed off pissed off AIPAC and like the Zionists in general, because he said something about I think someone asked him what his take. Remember when Donald Trump was first running for president, and they would ask him about issues that he clearly had never even was it Chris Matthews goes like, "Are you pro-life or pro-choice?" He goes, "I'm extremely pro-life, the most pro-life." And then they go, "So should women go to jail?" He's like, "Yeah, they got to go to jail." And then the next day he was like, "I don't know, I just never thought of that before." Like it's not like he's not a traditional politician in that sense. And so he just said, they asked him a question like, "Where do you stand on Israel-Palestine?" And I think he just said America should stay out and be neutral, because that just seemed to him like, oh yeah, that's what I'm running on. I'm running on stay out of the Middle East and let's not waste money on that. And then people, as to a hardcore Zionist saying America should just stay out and be neutral is basically saying we should be Adolf Hitler. I mean, they were just furious about it. And I remember this was very at the beginning of when Donald Trump was running for president. And the reason why I just remember this is because for me, it was the first moment that it was the first time I ever took Donald Trump seriously as a politician. Up until then, he was leading in the polls, but I was kind of like, this is like a joke candidate. He's going to drop out and go write a book or something like that. I didn't really think he was going to be a contender. And then he went and spoke at AIPAC. And there was this tension because he had just made this comment. And then he opened it by railing against he opened it by talking about how the Iran deal was the worst deal that's ever been made in the history of the world, and that he's the art of the deal guy, and Obama's so bad at deals, and all of this. And he had the place on their feet,
Yeah, this is exactly true. This happened in early 2016, and here's what Politico wrote about it. Trump backs away from neutral stance on Israel because he was just getting hammered by the lobby, which again, it shows how powerful the lobby is to turn Trump back toward Israel such that he could be considered a serious candidate. So Dave's point is landing, if you ask me, on this one. This talks about how he walked it back and then he became acceptable to the Israel lobby. This is what happened during Trump's presidency, and Dave is recalling this properly.
They just loved him. And I remember it was the first time that I thought like, oh, he's not just like moving red state Americans on like, yeah, we're going to build a wall, but he can go in and like move AIPAC. Like I remember thinking, oh, maybe this guy might be a legit contender. But so anyway, I'm not like even drawing any conclusion from that, but I do know that like early on, he said something, there was kind of like a hornet's nest reaction. And then he went like, well, I'm going to go way hardcore over the top. And my guess would be that Donald Trump's, I think kind of his, like the Abraham Accords type shit. I'm sorry, I don't know if we're not supposed to curse.
No, you can curse, it's fine.
Okay, but the Abraham Accords stuff, the stuff about talking about turning Gaza into beautiful, beachfront property. I do think that's the type of stuff that kind of makes Donald Trump tick, and I think that he thinks being all in pro-Israel is like the best way to accomplish that.
Yeah, this is what Jared Kushner and Tony Blair, the would-be real estate moguls of Gaza, have been trying to push him to accept, and that's what he brought up in that White House conference with Benjamin Netanyahu. It's no doubt that Israel has moved Trump in so many ways. Earlier in the video, I listed the ways it's moved Trump during his first administration, but in this administration, it's just looking the other way while there's a genocide in Gaza, not using any kind of U.S. leverage to stop that. Maybe the threat of withdrawing some aid at all. But does that cross the mind of Trump or Congress that's complicit? No. And to show the Israeli influence in government, it only has to be optically. And looking at what happens when Benjamin Netanyahu waltzes into Congress and delivers an address to a joint sitting of Congress, he gets far more adulation, far more clapping, and far more praise than any U.S. president ever would right now. More than Trump, more than Biden. He gets universal praise and adulation almost. I mean, there are some outliers, of course. On the right, it's like Marjorie Taylor Greene and Thomas Massey. And on the left, it's like Ehud. Like there's, to some extent, parts of the squad. There's, some good members like Ro Khanna don't accept that, but they are few and far between too. On both sides, there's outliers that don't give him that kind of praise, but he does enjoy that praise. And to say that, the Israel lobby's influence, just shrugging that off as Coleman did here is just wrong-headed in so many ways. But the same respect, I have to give Coleman some props for actually discussing the issues rather than just like using unlimited appeals to authority like Douglas Murray did. So I disagreed with Coleman throughout this clip in general, this entire video. This is just a small subsection of that. But to host Dave and actually have a debate on the issues is very good. But yeah, I'm with Dave here. Obviously, Israel, is not in full control of the government, but has palpable, tangible control that no other country enjoys. And for any country to have any sort of control over the United States, which gives them the money, is just so unprecedented in world history. It's truly why people say this is the tail wagging the dog. The U.S. is the benefactor, and Israel is beneficiary of the United States in this arrangement, and the U.S. and its citizenry that is forced to pay this bill through the extortion apparatus known as the IRS gets no say in it. Despite the fact that Americans aren't on board with sending them unlimited money right now. It happens anyways. It happened during the TARP bailouts. Lots of unpopular policies, get passed, showing that the whole notion of democracy is a farce. This isn't a representative government by any stretch of the imagination, and what Americans think doesn't exactly always matter. It really is what the Israel lobby thinks, the military-industrial complex thinks, the bank thinks. They're all in collusion with each other, and it's a bipartisan phenomenon. It's the uniparty, and that's what we've come to dread. But look, I think Dave made great points here. The influence of the Israel lobby is, insurmountable in some ways. And, really, it's just so undeniable in so many respects. And if you ask me, the JCPOA was really the only good foreign policy decision Obama ever did. He launched new wars in Syria, siding with Al Qaeda and ISIS to do that, by the way, in the CIA's Operation Timber Sycamore, and in Libya, ramped up the drone war in Yemen, all sorts of other nonsense and absurd killing streaks, killing American citizens without due process. The son of a lackey he killed without due process. But the JCPOA was one area where he normalized relations with Iran, and that pissed off Israel. He compensated Israel by, ramping up the foreign aid to Israel. That's when it went up to $4 billion a year. But at the same time, that took the pretext that Netanyahu wants for a regime change there off the table. And that's something that Trump tore to shreds, showing again the influence of the Israel lobby. And he clamored for that after this turn from a neutral stance in 2016 that Dave referenced. But I do want to hear from you. Is Dave Smith right about this? How influential is Israel on our U.S. political system, on Donald Trump, on Congress? Let me know in the comments down below. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel. Also subscribe to Dave Smith. He's awesome. If you like this video and the commentary, please click the join button below. You can become a member. I'd really appreciate it if you went that length to support me, and in return for that, I'll give you access of all my members only videos before they go live to the general public on YouTube if you join as a member. And until I see you guys next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, and no more empire. Peace out, guys. Catch you in the next one.